panelists. So, welcome everyone. Uh, this is the Healthy Planet Action Coalition general meeting, and we're very pleased to have two people discussing their experience at COP28 and perhaps offering some opinions about how that went. Um, One is Viktor Jaakkola, who is I'll just read what I put in the introduction here for those who haven't read it. Viktor has been working full time in Operaatio Arktis, and Viktor, excuse me if I mispronouncing that. This is a Finnish organization. For the last year and a half, Operaatio Arktis is a youth-led science communication project based in Helsinki with a special focus on Arctic sea ice prevention and climate interventions that could help stabilize the climate situation in the Arctic. Viktor has a couple of years of environmental economics studies under his belt, but those studies are on break for now. That's our first presenter. And then our second presenter is Professor Hugh Hunt, is a deputy director of the Center for Climate Repair at Cambridge University. He's professor of dynamics and vibrations in the Department of Engineering at that university. He has been a lecturer since 1989. He got his PhD in engineering from Cambridge. He's also a college lecturer and director of studies of engineering at Trinity College. His principal research interest is in albedo enhancement for climate intervention. How can we refreeze the Arctic? Within the Center for Climate Repair, he is most interested in the engineering aspects of marine cloud brightening and stratospheric aerosol injection. Other interests include railway noise and vibration, gyroscopes, boomerangs, wave power, renewable energy, tower clocks, and the vibration of bell towers. So I think we'll be talking about the former rather than the latter, but it's interesting to to have a sense of the range of uh, uh, Professor Hunt's interests. So I think I think we were. Have you guys discussed how you want to proceed with this? If not, I will just ask. Okay, I'll just ask Viktor. Are you okay with starting the discussion,
Yeah,
or
sure.
okay, okay, and maybe we'll have. So we usually go until if that's okay with our presenters, we go for about an hour and a half, but we can cut off sooner if you have other commitments. But and about half of that maybe, or half or less would be presentation. The other half would be discussion. This is, Viktor, maybe we'll give you, maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and the same for Hugh, and if that's okay with you, and then open it up for discussion. But without further ado, Viktor, why don't you uh, uh, start kick it off here?
Okay, thank you, Ron. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. Can you hear me all right? Great. Um, so indeed, I was at COP28. It was my first COP. I flew there with three of my colleagues, Anton, Anni, and Lena, and we were there for the second week. We had blue passes, so we were uh, able to enter the blue zone. And some things to take away from this was that there is still quite a bit of a delusion on the climate science front. So 1.5C is still viewed as attainable with conventional methods of emission reduction, which is of course nothing new here, but it's still quite baffling to encounter it, since well, some negotiators may have political reasoning for why they are still sticking to this tale of 1.5 being possible. Others may just be uh, wishful thinkers, or they think there's a small sliver of a chance that we may be able to stay at such a temperature with conventional measures. But of course, I think I speak for all of us that we do not really feel the same or think the same. I think the best thing about COP was just meeting youth from around the world. We met with people who are in the SRM scene, for it and against it, and there were some pretty good discussions. Although it's pretty clear that most young people are opposed to, or at least very skeptical about SRM in general. And the first thing when we got into the blue zone was actually a protest that was against false solutions, which included geoengineering and carbon markets and things like this. And it's it was definitely more visible than people speaking for SRM research. Of course, this was my first COP, so I don't really know how it has been in other years, but from what I heard, the topic of climate interventions was still more represented than earlier. We, of course, had the Center for Climate Repair people there. We had the emergency group with Regina Valdez and Heidi Brault and these people. And then we had Ocean Visions and then different youth from around the world participating in these discussions. So it was pretty broad. There were talks in many pavilions. But sometimes you get this feeling that it's a little bit of a bubble, perhaps, where the people in the climate intervention scene are kind of presenting to each other, and then we're not really sure if people are tuning in on the streams or not. Probably not too many people. So it's I think a certain person there said it pretty well that she's really only interested in speaking with people who are against climate interventions. And she was in the field researching these things. And I kind of start thinking similarly, because we've had, well, it's interesting and it's important. We really need to try to broaden the outreach. How many attendees total to COP? From our team, 4, I think in Dubai there were like 100,000 or something. So biggest COP ever, I think. I don't have a presentation. I had some notes written up. Yeah, I think the biggest issue is we have these really short presentations, which are like 10-15 minutes long at COP, and you can't really go into much detail, and it's very, very quick. So because we need to be on the same page about the direness of the climate situation, then that's going to take very limited time to talk about.
Viktor, you're breaking up a little.
So that's a problem.
Would you mind repeating?
Operaatio Arktis had.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you could just repeat your last sentence, I don't know if other people experienced,
right.
I couldn't hear you. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry for the bad connection. I'm in a cabin in the woods, so that could have an effect. What was I saying? Yeah, I think it would be good whenever we have a presentation at these places to kind of run it by an audience that isn't familiar with the climate intervention discussion. That would be really helpful. I mean, there was a presentation on, I think, methane removal that I watched, and I actually didn't really understand what the specific interventions were. because it was so unclear, even for someone who is kind of familiar with the interventions and stuff. So probably run these things by people outside of our scene would be great, because you don't want to get too complicated, and the audience is not only climate scientists or anything like that. So really, it can be difficult to see how people react or what they take away from a presentation. Would you, Hugh, want to say something at this point? I don't really have much else prepared. I was just thinking it was like
well,
okay.
I think Viktor, I'd be happy to ask you a few questions and perhaps have a discussion, if that would be all right with you, Ron.
Yes, please.
Firstly, I think it's important to put the Viktor's Operaatio Arktis into some context, because they are, if you look at the screen that you're looking at now, the people on this particular call are, dare I say, Viktor's the youngest person in the room. But Operaatio Arktis, this is the team, part of the team. And just, it tells you something. And this group, Operaatio Arktis, has produced this booklet, and I've talked about this before on this forum, but just to make you aware of it, they produced it just last year, and it's it's 80 pages long, but in the middle of it, it's got this stuff, and these are young people in their 20s who are looking at the technologies of albedo enhancement, essentially. And what was fantastic was to have them there in Dubai, and really being a strong voice, standing up against some other strong voices who, as Anton says, were saying we can still do 1.5 C by emissions reductions alone. Annie, who was there, gave a presentation which is recorded, where she is repeating the fact that the mantra of emissions reductions alone will do the trick is 30 years old, and that 30 years ago emissions reductions alone might have done the trick, but 30 years after you tell someone to stop smoking and they get cancer, well, telling them to stop smoking ceases to be the right message. So the right message now is clear, that we've got to be doing other things than emissions reductions. We must do emissions reductions. We must be doing carbon dioxide and greenhouse gas removal from the atmosphere. But that's too late to have an impact on the Arctic. The Arctic timescale there is 10 years or so. Who knows what it is? We don't have a crystal ball on that, but it's pretty soon. But what was clear in Dubai was these discussions were not happening inside the committee rooms. Were not being had inside the negotiation rooms. They were not being had by the politicians and the decision makers. But one thing that was said by the president, Al Jaber, was that there isn't a pathway that stands up based on reducing burning of fossil fuels. And the Guardian reported on this, twisting his words a bit, saying that he didn't believe in the science of climate change or something. But what I think he was saying was, being honest, that actually, if we want to stop burning fossil fuels, well, let's come up with a pathway that means that India can, that people in India who aspire to a better lifestyle can get their energy from somewhere. And people who are like us, who are already addicted or perhaps dependent on fossil fuels, can find a way off them. But here we are at COP28. We're not able to deal with emissions reductions alone. So in Dubai, inside the negotiation rooms, the conversation was nothing. There was nothing happening on the climate repair front, and but then outside, lots of refreshing things were happening. People were talking. We're talking about climate repair, geoengineering, in a way that I've never seen before. There were dozens of events, and people were listening, partly because young people were touting the message. And there were places where people were going. There was that event, Viktor, in a cafe in Dubai, and it was
Right.
organized by young people, and it was a discussion on SRM. And then there was an event in the Green Zone organized by young people on SRM. All of the events on SRM were organized by young people. It was just extraordinary. It's as if, well, as Annie put it, when she was confronted in a question at the end of her presentation, the questioner said that they thought that that geoengineering was a distraction and that it ought not to be discussed, let alone researched. It should be put to bed and never discussed. And she responded and said, "Well, look, I value my future. I'm a young person. I would like to see a future for myself and my friends. And who are you to tell me, a young person, that we shouldn't be researching tools that may well that we may well depend on?" So for me, the message that came out from Dubai was that the voice of young people on this topic is being heard. And what I think we've got to do is to big this up as best we can. Now, it was interesting. There was an event which was organised. I can't remember the name of the event, but they produced this booklet, which I don't know whether you can read that, but it's how do we plan to govern technologies that can reduce the Earth's temperature? And this is a booklet produced by Solar Radiation Modification Youth Watch. Now, these are young people organizing this thing, and you can tell it's a young person's thing because when you read this thing, it's all it's sort of cartoon style, and it's that they bothered to do this is absolutely extraordinary. And there was an event which was well attended, well organized. I have to say the organization of these youth events was absolutely extraordinary. And then another publication that I saw in when I was there was this one, which comes out of basically organized by John Moore in Lapland. And this is what's useful about this is that it has in the middle of it a table which has 63 climate intervention techniques. So a table with 63 climate intervention techniques. It's not complete, but boy, it talks about, it goes one by one, and it discusses them in terms of their impact and their various things. But these things are being talked about. And I was just very taken by that. Then there are events organized by in the Nordic Pavilion but elsewhere. But the Nordic Pavilion was very good at this, getting people from low-lying states to talk about their situation. And at one event, the ambassador for that low-lying island, and I do forget the name, but perhaps Viktor might remember. We were talking about seabed curtains, and the fact that she came out of the committee rooms to present to this event on geoengineering was very powerful, and so I think we're at the beginning of a new way, I think, for dealing with how these discussions are being had. Now, there was an event organized in Dubai in a hotel somewhere, and President Grimson from Iceland gave a long and passionate address, and he basically said that it is with sadness that he has to say that the UN process at COP is just not functioning, but that what is functioning is the day-to-day discussions and the interactions with groups like HPAC, we're here now, and with Operaatio Arktis and elsewhere, and that he said that the COP process, they have these big meetings once per year, and that rate of reaching conclusions was too slow. And he said every day, every one of us in this room wakes up in the morning and can do something new every day, whereas the COP process is constrained with a year-by-year process, even a 5-year by 5-year process. So he was very impassioned, saying that the 3 poles, so the Arctic, the Antarctic, and the Himalayan glaciers, can't wait for the COP process, and that we need to be researching the necessary interventions. And he was, I thought that was for me, that was a very powerful message. Now, I think that we have to think whether the COP28 was a good COP or not, whether it was successful or not. And there's a lot of negativity about it, that they can barely even, they've finally got around to putting down in writing that fossil fuels are the cause of climate change. It's taken a long time to get to that as an agreement. And then putting in small amounts of money into the loss and damage fund. Okay, it's Salim ul-Haq has died just late last year, and so that was a very good thing, I suppose, to do. But it's not. Yes, we can applaud that something's been done on that front, but we'd like not to have to use the loss and damage fund at all. So these are all seen as positives, but they're pretty weak positives. The idea at the very beginning of COP that it was agreed that the fossil fuel industries will be net zero by 2050. That oil and gas production would be net zero by 2050. Well, look, it's just such a con. If you were to create make your oil and gas platforms run on wind turbines, that's great. The platforms themselves might be net zero, but the oil and gas that's being produced is the big problem. But somehow the headlines, they manipulate the headlines pretty well. So that was unfortunate. I thought that the message at the beginning sounded a lot more positive than it was. But I do think that we've had an opportunity in COP28 in an oil-rich state being led by an oil person to see the process laid bare more than we've seen before, and with young people being the voice. So I don't know, Viktor, whether that prompts you to say anything more on your experiences, but I just thought that you guys were very much you were very, very important at COP28. Not many people were listening to your message, but you were there, and your messages will get stronger. I don't know, Viktor, whether you want to say anything more on that.
Thank you, Hugh. Appreciate it. Yeah, I agree. I think it's pretty important or good that we went there. Perhaps we will be back in the future in some other years. Who knows? It's very possible. Yeah, you mentioned the loss and damage fund, and I was at the Overshoot Commission's session in the Green Zone, and think of them what you will, but there was the former foreign minister of Pakistan, who is a part of the commission, and she said pretty well that if we are to make progress on the topic of climate interventions, we're probably going to have to include the global south and build a trust between the global south and north, and that the proper funding of the loss and damage fund would be somewhat of a beginning for that. That was her reply on the question of how we can somehow together tackle this issue of climate intervention, since obviously they are most often global in their effects. At least
I think you mentioned that you mentioned the global south. I don't know whether you were there when the question of climate intervention and governance, and then somebody from I just can't remember, but Global South said that it was colonialism all over again. That the governance, the people who are making decisions about whether or whether not to research or perhaps even deploy climate interventions, the people who are making those decisions are from affluent countries, and that the people who most need those decisions to be made properly are from the global south, and that it reeks of colonialism to say that the decisions should be made by the global north, and that's a pretty strong message, and is coming out in discussions more and more. And we kind of think, oh well, what we need to do is to engage with the global south, but that also reminds me of an event in at the Arctic Circle Assembly, where somebody said at an event involving Sami people, they said, look, we are absolutely happy We want Sami people to come to be at the table to discuss the things that need to be done and make sure the Sami people are well represented. And the Sami woman just replied very briefly. She said, "Excuse me, sir, it's our table, not yours." So, she's saying, yes, you're welcome to come to our table. How dare you invite us to your table? How dare you be saying that you define whose table it is? Well, come on. Our homeland is our table. And I think that these kinds of discussions were, these kinds of retorts, these kind of interventions were very frequent in the various events I went to in COP28. And I don't know whether you saw that too, Viktor.
Yeah, I saw some of that. And I think that the topic of governance, at least this was some of the critique I heard, is often dismissed, especially by perhaps people in the climate intervention scene with a natural science background, who perhaps view this as, well, not merely like physics question of an energy balance, but there's also a big and a difficult topic of governance, and some people view this as impossible to conduct in a just way, and sort of oppose climate interventions already from that standpoint. I'm probably going to continue some of these discussions with the most influential or vocal opponents to SRM research in the coming months.
But there is an interesting question that I just saw in the chat about what happens if the Global South opposes geoengineering. I think the general feeling that I got, and of course all generalizations are false, was that the opposition is stronger in Arctic regions, opposition to geoengineering research. The messages from the Global South are research is necessary. And I don't know whether that's a generalization which doesn't hold up, but that was my feeling. When it comes to implementing geoengineering, I don't think anyone is saying gung-ho, let's go and do it. At least not the people at the COP. There might be people around this table today that are saying so. But the idea that we should be doing research is more prominently supported in the Global South than in the Arctic regions. That's my feeling. I suspect, Ron, that we might be getting a point where you might want to moderate a discussion, because I feel as if I've said all I want to say, and maybe Viktor might feel the same.
Yes. No, thank you, Hugh. Thank you very much. Viktor, did you have some last comments, or would you ready to take questions?
Perhaps as a last comment that, of course, the Global South isn't a singular entity, and I know people from the Global South who are very much in favor of research, and some who are against. Perhaps remember that it's the same in the North concerning these questions. But, yeah.
Okay. Okay? Thank you, Viktor. Okay, so our usual procedure here is to just call on people in the orders. People raise your hands if you have a question, and we'll turn it over to Viktor and Hugh to respond if they want. And I think the first one here was Jonathan Cole.
Great, thanks. Yes, Viktor, I'm looking at a map of Arctic territorial claims, and it doesn't appear that Finland.
Jonathan, you're a bit quiet. I don't know whether you can go a bit closer to your microphone or.
How about now? Are you hearing me okay?
That's okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Anyway, Victor, it doesn't appear that Finland has any territorial claims in the Arctic region where the ice might be. Have you combined your group, or do you have members of your group who are either from Denmark or Norway to be able to use their citizenship to make claims to do things?
No, we don't. Are you kind of talking about research in the Arctic?
Well, just it helps from a legal standpoint to, if you want to enforce a policy of something that would keep the ice from melting as fast, to be able to say,
Right.
well, that's my territory.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Finland is an Arctic country, but no, we don't have any territorial claim on the Arctic Ocean. It would be a good idea to build up some kind of coalition with other young people from the Nordic countries. So far, we haven't stumbled upon them. Perhaps they don't exist. I don't know. If you are a young person from the Nordics, Norway, Denmark, who would like to reach out to us and do something with us, please contact us. Yeah, so far we've just been concentrating on Finland and now a little bit more international stuff as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Hugh, I assume you don't have a comment on that. I'll move on to Herb.
Thanks, Ron. I think Dave King, Dave, you had your hand up first, so I'm going to defer to Dave, and then I'll go afterwards.
Oh, you think you're on mute there, Dave? Yeah.
Yeah. You got me now? Yes. So basically, what I did want to say was Hugh referred to the fact that we began these discussions 30 plus years ago, and we've made very little progress in the sense that greenhouse gases are still rising in the atmosphere. But of course, it's very important that we also understand why this is happening. The fossil fuel lobby is extremely powerful. And it was very evident, to me at least, at COP28 that the fossil fuel lobby was present there more than in any previous COP, and they've always been heavily present. We just need to understand that, because frankly, it is right that we should be discussing climate intervention. This particular group is very concerned about developing good climate interventions techniques, and I've been a big part of that process and continue to do that. But we've got to also understand that at the current level of emissions, and it's still rising, 40 billion carbon dioxide tons per annum, but what about the addition of methane? It takes us over 50 billion tons per annum. We're not going to manage a safe future for humanity unless we also bring this down to as close to zero as possible. Of course, we all recognize that with the melting of Arctic sea ice, and this is now, of course, very evident in the Antarctic region. We've seen this happening for a long time, and other regions, mountainous regions, the Himalayas has been mentioned. We need to buy time. We need to refreeze the Arctic, for example, as a means of managing a future. Buying time means giving us time to reduce emissions. We must do it in an orderly fashion. But let's not be too negative about this. I think everyone needs to look at what the International Energy Agency is producing in terms of detailed information on the remarkable change. 2023, again, a very big increase in renewable energy uptake around the world. And this is happening because of the power of the marketplace. Renewable energy is now considerably cheaper for many, many parts of the world than new fossil fuel energy installation and usage. So it is running forward, but it's of course not running forward nearly quickly enough. Now we've had a COP in Egypt. We've now had a COP in Dubai. The next COP is going to be in Afghanistan. Is this the power of the fossil fuel industry determining even where the COP meetings should be? Now, I'm a bit suspicious of this, but when I say a bit, I'm understating my position. I think we really need to be aware as well of the power of the lobby in the United States. If the United States had taken a full leadership position, and by the way, I'm not going to agree with everybody on this call, but I've got to point out that Britain has now reduced its emissions since 1990 by 48%, and yet our entire economy since the Industrial Revolution was built on energy production from coal, and we're no longer producing electricity from coal. I want to say to the United States, get on with it, right? You guys could easily do this. You've got the funds, you can do it. Get on with it and stop blocking the way. I was a negotiator at the COP meetings for many years, leading on the British front. And I can tell you, we on average have 20 official negotiators per country. That's 4,000 negotiators. How do you negotiate anything like that? But when the United States turns up with 160 negotiators, and until very recently, these negotiators have been going around persuading countries not to bother to take action. Right, so I think we need to understand, without US leadership, we're in the sort of difficulty we're in. So don't take your eye off the ball. We must reduce emissions, otherwise we're cooked. Yes, let's get on and discover how we can buy time by doing these climate interventions. That's what it's about.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think good points. Let me move on to Herb. Back to Herb.
Thanks, Ron. And I reluctantly I have to agree with you, Dave, that the country I'm in is the biggest. Well, pick your adjective, I guess. But some of us, and Mike McCracken, who's here with me, are working with or attempting to work with our local representatives and the Biden administration to shift them and to be more proactive. Time will tell. But first, I want to thank Hugh and Viktor, and I'm a little wistful because I had planned and was unbelievably excited with the opportunity to go to Dubai, and then I was under the weather and had to cancel. So I missed all that good stuff and probably also some not very good stuff that you discussed. But maybe next year in Baku, we can all get together. I don't know how much of a rallying cry that is. But that being said, I'd like to focus, as I think we all do, on the future as well as the past. And it's my understanding that this coming week in Istanbul will be the IPCC, I think it's called the plenary meeting, where they'll be coming up or starting to work on the work program for the next set of reports and the next cycle. And as I understand it, the one special report that they apparently are focusing on right now is climate change in cities. But I'm wondering, is anyone here working with folks that are on the committees to advocate for a special report on cooling or some such kind of effort? Do you think that's a good idea? If it is, I know, I hope and assume this won't be the final decision made next week in Istanbul, but is there an opportunity to influence the agenda going forward, at least from my point of view? And I think most of us would agree to wait in for 6 more years until the IPCC says something a little more positive about cooling, is not very prudent, or, well, it's not very helpful. But certainly those special reports that can, I guess, be commissioned at any time, like the report on 1.5 was, could make quite a difference. I'm not naive enough to think that that's likely to happen, but I also wonder if there's an opportunity for us to attempt to make a case. So I throw that out to Hugh and Viktor and anyone else who would like to respond.
Can I just quickly chip in there, because Herb, you're raising a very important issue. I'm chairman of the Climate Crisis Advisory Group, which is a global group representing 12. We've got 12 countries represented in the group, and we've put out 20 reports over the last 2.5 years. And the point is that we respond quickly. I also want to say that half of our members are authors of IPCC reports. So we are working on our own members to see that they try and do this. It's not an easy task, right? The IPCC is politically controlled. The group that I'm chairing has no political bosses at all, right? So I think we've just got to remember that the final reports of the IPCC go through a political process.
Is there anything, well, that's heartening to hear. Is there anything that we at HPAC and the other groups can do to assist you and the advisory committee and others?
Yeah, well, I think I'm involved with many of the people, and I know most of you on this group. And I apologize that I haven't appeared on this group before. Just happened to have the time tonight, so. But yeah, you are influential, I can tell you. And the climate intervention, we actually have produced a report on climate intervention. So it's not as if it's off the table for us. And yes, we would like to influence the IPCC reports more. But once again, don't forget what I said about the power of the fossil fuel lobby. It even influences, in other words, the IPCC reports.
David, just let us know when you are available. We would be very happy to have you, present to HPAC. Viktor or Hugh, did you want to comment on Herb's question?
Yeah, so I've just put in the chat a link to this Turkey meeting. If you click on it, you will see that it is extremely opaque in that it tells you what the numbers of the documents are in Roman numerals, and it doesn't actually give you much insight as to what they're going to talk about. And then you click on the first item, which says provisional agenda. And if you click on the thing that says provisional agenda, it again doesn't tell you anything about what they're going to talk about. It's almost as if the process is designed, perhaps by the fossil fuel industry, that to make sure that things are not easy to participate in. And you think, oh gosh, I don't know what this thing is. I'll just let it float by and do things that I enjoy doing. But I think it is a really important meeting. It's the 60th IPCC meeting. So if we think 28 is a big number, 60 is even bigger. It's important. Yes, I do wonder how we can have an influence.
Yeah, if I could, just the source for the information I presented is my usual source, which is X or Twitter. If I could just take 30 seconds from Oliver Gedden, who many of you may know, the climate scientist, who basically a couple of days ago said 2 AR7 products have already been agreed to during AR6, a special report on climate change in cities, and a methodology report on short-lived climate forcers, with scoping meetings already happening in the coming months. Although likely it's not a given that an assessment cycle produces working group reports, and then blah, blah, blah. So anyway, that's where I got the information from.
Thank you. Or perhaps you could follow up with Sir David and Hugh and Viktor and others who are interested. Yeah, just put that out on it. Yeah, thank you.
Happy to.
Okay, let's move on. So I think, Mike, I think you're up.
Thank you. I guess what I'd like to understand, if during this meeting, in all these various discussions, there was any discussion of what level of change might affect people, might change people's minds about climate intervention. A number of us, certainly here on the coalition, think we're already at a level where we should be doing this and should be starting it, at least very much should be researching it. But how far do they think we can warm, or how much can we let the ice sheets deteriorate and cause sea level rise before people might say, well, I'm willing to reconsider about which is the worst relative future that I'm facing?
Well, it is absolutely astonishing how, I mean, as Viktor said right at the beginning, the idea that 1.5 degrees C is attainable by emissions reductions alone is prevalent. Viktor, you're about to say, I think.
Right. A couple of things came to mind. I was talking with Ricardo from Sustenta Honduras. He's from Honduras, and of course, this is a place where tropical storms cause great disruption. I think there was a year when 40% of the GDP was wiped out. And in places like these, of course, interventions start to sound like something at least worth researching when this is the kind of reality you're facing. I'm not sure when rich Western countries will wake up to this situation. I don't know. At least from Operaatio Arktis perspective, we can see what's coming down the road. So we're sort of reacting before we are in a situation of mayhem. And so the predictions are bad enough. I don't really understand why people aren't waking up in larger numbers. But for some kind of strategy on how to get more people to wake up, we have decided to produce like a longer educational program that's going to be like an hour or perhaps a bit longer, that we're going to roll out sometime next year, perhaps in the summertime or springtime if we get it done. But to that, because we had some discussion of the IPCC as well, and the IPCC of course has great authority in the climate discussion. I would appreciate any literature on the way the IPCC would be, or is politically controlled, or is displaying a somewhat more conservative outlook for the climate than perhaps the reality is. So I would appreciate that. I'm just going to drop my email in the chat if someone can think of anything.
Well, I might just comment on that, because we talked about at a previous meeting where I was talking about level of risk. I mean, the IPCC has a scientific framing that you have to prove something to high confidence before you say something. The conference of the parties, if it were doing what I think it should be doing, given they're representing the public, should be representing the risks that are involved, not just relying on the IPCC waiting till it's got 2 or 3 sigma confidence. Going back just a minute to this issue of thresholds. So the problem is in part that it seems to me that the global average temperature measure is just not very useful and appropriate to what has to do with impacts. So in low latitudes where your temperature change is sort of moderated by the oceans, temperature isn't a big issue, but it's the amount of water vapor and then precipitation that occurs that is the big thing, the deluges that you can get because there's so much moisture going in the air. In other places in Southeast Asia, it's issues of sea level rise and the threat to it, and the low-lying islands should be focusing on that and raising the the issue and the threat they face. In other places in mid-latitudes, it might be extremes. I don't know if you've looked at Jim Hansen's latest sort of curve of his Gaussian kind of thing, but what was, a 0.15% likelihood in the mid-20th century is now up at 24% likelihood or something. It's an increase of 175 in 3 sigma or greater events. It's huge change on extremes. And you would think that those kinds of things would be used rather than whether we're going to get global average temperature to 1.5, which is just sort of especially when it's a 10 or 20-year averaged metric for past change. It's just a totally inappropriate metric for thinking about impacts and having people address whether it's time to do something more than just do emissions reduction. I'm sorry, that was opinion, but I guess I just wonder if the people there are addressing it.
Yeah, thank you. So for those of you who are not familiar with Mike, he's a very senior scientist in the U.S. Policy, also at the Lawrence Livermore Lab. So and he's a member of the HVAC committee. So anyway, we're perhaps giving him a little extra time here, but we do want to move on. So yeah, if folks could, be mindful that a lot of people are now wanting to comment or ask a question. Could you make your statements brief? And
so I'm just gonna make one last comment on that last question. The presentation that Ani Pokela gave at COP was interrupted. Well, there was a question at the end by a chap in Exeter called Martin Siegert, who basically was very opposed to the idea of climate engineering. I just think it's worth listening to Annie's answer. So somebody who is an expert in polar science at the right-hand side of 50 years old, being responded to by somebody at the left-hand side of 50 years old. I'll just put the link in the chat and you can have a listen.
Thank you. Yes, I did. I looked at that whole video and I highly recommend it. Also, Viktor's group did a conference earlier, and there's also a video of that. And they're both, I think, excellent. And people should, if you have a chance, take a look at those. Gregory.
Thank you for letting me talk. This has been very interesting to me. I mean, my problem is, my sense is that, for climate, for using geoengineering, there's a requirement that we first put in place a system of global justice, which we've been working on for 40,000 years, and we're not even close. We got hundreds of years to get to a just world, and I don't see a chance in hell that we will get world agreement in time to proceed as we have to. And what will happen, therefore, is it'll be pushed until the rich people start feeling it, or, whoever decides it's too much, and then they'll just do it. And that's, look at the way wars are fought. Countries don't do long studies on the effects of the Ukraine war on world economy, 20 years, and then say, okay, we'll go to war now. As long as the global south votes for it. No, they just do it. And that's what's going to happen. I really think, I wish it wasn't that case, but we got a long way to go before we have a just world, or even a just America. And that's the other thing about, America should get its act together. Well, tell us how. Talk to the Repubs. It's evenly split, more or less, between, these two sides. And for example, Biden has got stuff in just this last point has put in, he's backed increased fossil fuel because he has to get agreement for like his climate bill. He had to get agreement of what's his name or whoever. He can't, his hands are tied, and then he's trying to get elected again. And if he upsets too many people, he's out and Trump's in. That's just the way it is, man. Anyway, that's my.
Thank you, Greg. Hugh or Victor, do you have comments on this? Okay, let's. I agree with you, Greg. I think you're absolutely right. Robert.
Yeah, hi.
Chris.
A really interesting conversation. I want to pick up on a couple of points that Dave King made that feed directly into the COP process, the whole UNFCCC question. Hugh commented about the fact that SRM was not discussed in the formal negotiations. And Dave has remarked at this session and on many times previously about the fact that the entire process has been politicized and hijacked effectively by the fossil fuel industry and also historically by the US administration, although much less so in recent times. Excuse me. So what we also know, and it was a comment that that Dave made reference to, was the reports from actually a lot of places. CCAG issue reports, the IPCC issue reports, every university on the planet issues reports. The one thing we are not short of is reports on every aspect of climate change you should imagine. So Victor made a comment earlier that he didn't understand why people hadn't woken up. And I think the response to that is kind of an issue that is hidden in this conversation, which is we have not spoken once in this conversation today about power. And this whole story is effectively about power. Dave King talks about the power of the US in its negotiations. He talks about the power of the fossil fuel lobby. Now, this group particularly, we know about the technology, we know about the science, but we are novices when it comes to the power. And it seems to me that if we are to have any purchase whatsoever, somehow we need to find a way of getting together a power, a force that is of the same scale and the same resources as the fossil fuel lobby. I'm talking, literally, I'm talking multi-tens, hundreds of millions of dollars available to go out and do exactly what the fossil fuel lobby does, but tell the story that we know should be told and isn't being told. As far as I can tell, the only way that could be done is through the family offices, the billionaires that have the resources to put this together. And it needs people who have access to those people to kind of put this together. But I am quite convinced that until the forces of opposition, which is us, are able to bring to bear power at the same scale as the fossil fuel lobby, we will continue to have sessions like this, talking about all the things that should be happening, that need to happen. Wouldn't it be nice if they happened? About all the COP meetings where they talk about this stuff and they just push it all out into the long grass and nothing ever happens. Ultimately, we have got to get the power sorted, and only then will we be able to move forward.
Thank you, Robert. Hugh or Victor or Dave, do you have comments?
Well, it's certainly true. I agree with Robert, and how we get to a point where we can have an influence. We're not having much influence at the moment.
Right. We're not gonna concentrate on the billionaires. We're gonna go talk with the climate movement as broadly as we can and try to get them to adopt the idea of climate intervention research. So we're going to try to do that this year. But I appreciate your comments.
But let me just say, Victor, I think that doing that is absolutely essential. And it's really necessary to spread that message and to get as many people right across society on side with the story. But the tragedy is that unless the power balance can be redressed, the politicians who ultimately have to be the ones that make the decisions to make this happen, they will not move. And we see this in any number of areas where politicians are extraordinarily effective at avoiding action. You know, and we don't necessarily talk about climate. There's a whole stack of stuff. I mean, there's an extraordinary story for those of you that may not be aware.
Robert, if we could, yeah, thank you. We have a lot of people here. Thank you. Sorry. Okay, Sev.
Yep. Thanks, Robert. Your response actually segues remarkably well into mine. Regarding what Sir David said about the power of the fossil fuel industry, there is actually an opportunity to have that power work for us. Some of our climate repair methods should be attractive to fossil fuel interests, in particular, those dealing with direct climate cooling. This would give them a longer time to move from a high carbon future off and would let them have not so many stranded assets. I reckon we've got a really good story to tell them, to say, hey, you guys, pick up some of these ideas, research them, and then if they work out, you'll have more time to do what you normally do without destroying the planet.
Thank you, Sam. Any responses from our panel here? I've arbitrarily added
my experience on the SPICE project 10 years ago, stratospheric particle injection for climate engineering, is that we had protesters coming along to our meetings. We had a lot of protest. And the suspicion was that we were funded by the fossil fuel industry because, of course, what we were doing was exactly what they wanted. And so I totally agree with you, Sev. But then we have to figure out how to, the message has to be clear that we're not funded by the fossil fuel industry, but the conspiracy machine is out there, furiously working away to ensure that everybody thinks that we are funded by the fossil fuel industry.
Agreed. So we need to say why we're doing it and give the greenies and the others the reasons why we think we can actually make the devil work for us.
Well, we did try pretty hard, but our project was still shut down.
It was too early, I think. I think now is a better time.
Yeah. I think what you're suggesting is wishful thinking, because I think a much greater probability is that the fossil fuel industry will approach the prospect of their stranded assets by pushing fossil fuel consumption as hard and as long as they wish, so that their assets won't be stranded. That's where they're going to come from. That's our business, and that's what we're going to do. And you talk about stranded assets, we're not interested. We're going to be using
yeah, Robert. Let's try and maintain some the queue here. Thank you all. Okay, Leslie.
Yeah, hi. I wanted to. I tend to come from the viewpoint of what the heck can we do rather than all the barriers. And what I found to be really helpful that I wanted to pass on is AGU, the American Geophysical Union, has a really pretty activist leadership, and what they really want is for the science to then, be used for the benefit of society. And they've shown this in a couple of really great ways. One has been, they have, and I got to participate in this, developed a framework for how we do ethical climate intervention field testing research on the ground. And it happens to jive very well with what we've been recommended to do by an Indian, a Himalayan indigenous expert from the Himalayas, who is a water quality expert and an environmental impact assessment expert. And it's lovely to see that this common sense framework that the AGU leadership has now adopted jives with people across the world here, in an area very different. And we used this process when we did a glacial test in Iceland recently. So that was terrific. The other thing that AGU was doing, I understand AMS, the American Meteorological Society, has some similar things going on. But the other thing, I finally stepped up and did this because, and this is not natural to me, you folks would probably know, but I signed up to be one of the local science partners, to be part of, I think it's over 100 of us who volunteered this year, to go to AGU headquarters and DC for a few days and speak with the politicians from our respective states and make sure we're not lobbying, but what we're doing is we are attempting to be sure there aren't a lot of misconceptions about what's scientifically going on, what's really important in climate change. And who better than people who, really work hard to understand the science than to go and speak with the politicians. And apparently we're going to have help training on how to communicate clearly rather than amongst ourselves, which we're all pretty good at, but to people who don't have a deep scientific background, how to actually get the points across. And I have great hopes for this. And they're open to people of obviously all ages. So, if you get interested in this sort of thing, you should contact AGU or contact me and I'll put you in touch. It's something that might be able to shift the balance somewhat. So thanks for listening.
Thank you, Leslie. I think, unfortunately, we veered off our topic a little bit with all these. So, I mean, it is a very good discussion. But if the remaining folks, because our moderators are really here to talk about COP28, if you could address your comments to that, that would be good. If you or Victor, if you have no more comments, let's go on to Martin.
Oh, yes. Thank you. So the temptation is to try and respond to everything above, but I'll try not to do that. Sorry. I raised my hand when Mike was speaking because I agree with a lot of what you were saying there, Mike. On the average temperature and the message on that, I mean, I think to me, the message has to be like the evidence has changed. I mean, to me, 1.5 as a target is meaningless for many reasons, but particularly because it's too high. That, what's clear to me now, the evidence seems to be telling me that 1.4, 1.3 is too high, and nowhere is that more obvious in the Arctic. So, and what's happening there. So, I think that I don't know how you get that out there, but to me, the reality is that 1.5 is way too high. Where we are now is way too high, and that's why we need to act in a different way. So, and all the research is saying, like Hugh was saying, that emissions cuts, even if we just cut emissions to zero tomorrow, it's not going to stop what's happening in the Arctic, or it's very unlikely to. So, to me, that is a message I would try and get out there. Like, the evidence has changed, as opposed to modeling from 30 years ago to what we're living in it now. We don't need models anymore. We're in it, and it's too hot. I just wanted to quickly mention on the fossil fuel industry, I think I would definitely not touch their money with a barge pole unless it was really desperate. I think they've got their greenwashing of choice now. They've got carbon capture and storage and direct air capture that they're putting billions into, directly or indirectly at the moment. So I don't think they need geoengineering anymore for their greenwashing. What I really would love to know, and I'm guessing maybe this is not the case, but does anyone here know a fossil fuel executive or understand how they think? What is their mindset? Because they have kids and grandkids and so on, and it's hard to believe there aren't people in the fossil fuel industry who see what we see and recognize that we can't carry on like this. And I wonder if there's more we could do to reach out, sort of like sort of secretly or covertly or whatever, to people in the fossil fuel industry that actually recognize the problem is and what they're doing to us, because surely many of them must actually see it in reality. But I don't know anyone in that industry, but I think it'd be good to kind of reach out to people that do and try and engage them in what we're doing. but not in terms of for funding, but just to change their minds about what they're saying and what the information that they're spreading, the disinformation that they're spreading.
Thank you, Martin. Hugh or Victor, do you know any fossil fuel industry or have interactions? I'm sure Hugh probably has, and I know Mike McCracken has. Yeah, go ahead.
I can say that about 4 or 5 years ago, in Cambridge, we've got this responsible investment group, and we called the bluff on an invitation to attend a shareholders meeting, and we went to if I got this right, we went to a BP one, a Shell one, and we went to 3 of them. Young people, but these were students that went along, and they were very poorly treated. They were asking very sensible questions, and they got responses like, you know, one female PhD student asked a very good question and said, "Oh, well, dear, that's a very good question, but I think you should just concentrate on your research and not bother your little brain on all these important matters." It was awful. It was awful. And they wrote up this report about just how these shareholders meetings were totally stitched up. All the questions were prepared in advance. Everything just went according to plan. I'm not sure whether the report they wrote is publicly available. If I can find it and send you copies, I will, because it's very illuminating.
Thank you, Hugh. Victor, let me, if I could just, Martin also raised another question I think is quite important. And I know Hugh and maybe Victor as well, you may be aware that we have had some controversy over the speed for deployment of cooling methods with David Keith and others arguing that, you know, we need at least 10 more years of research, and some of us, well, in HPAC anyway, are very concerned that we need to move much faster. And is there a possibility, for example, of doing very small scale, sort of gradual deployment, you know, sort of pilot testing and checking things out and seeing how it goes, and then ramping up a little bit more, perhaps in the Arctic regions? I mean, as I'm sure you know, Hugh and Victor as well, the Cornell group has sort of advocated a polar strategy for SAI, and I mean, and as a marine cloud lightning as well. I mean, the various techniques. It seems odd that we should just wait and do research and more research and more research, when in fact we know that in many cases we really won't know the answers to things until we actually try at a small scale and gradually ramp up. So I would be curious, you know, because we're experiencing calamities right now.
Yeah, well, personally, I'm for small scale field trials, and I'd like to see them happen soon. When it comes to some kind of gradual intensification of techniques, I think that's where it gets tricky, because we have to have some kind of governance structures in place and some kind of consensus internationally on what kind of cooling we want to achieve, and who decides of it. But at least small scale field trials, I'm ready to speak for, as long as it's not happening over lands where, for example, people who are strictly opposed to it are living. I suppose that can be difficult with some techniques, but yeah, it's an interesting discussion, and one we should continue having for sure.
Thank you. Hugh, did you want to comment on that, or?
Just to say that I'm very pleased that the Southern Cross University's work in the Great Barrier Reef is an actual outdoor small-scale experimentation on marine cloud brightening, and terribly important work, because actual work, as Viktor says, gaining experience by doing, is what we need.
Thank you. Okay, Bruce.
Hey, sorry for having my screen all screwed up. Did it fix itself?
Yeah.
Okay. We've got a marine cloud brightening geoengineering experiment going on right now, and we just need to. We know exactly how many people it's killed, and we know exactly what to expect from global climate weather patterns. We just need to reduce it, because we're going to see pretty soon. Which leads me to my question about the COP. What was the discussion there on the recent temperature spike that began in about June, that is going to be responsible for at least 1.48 C, according to the European Union, and according to Berkeley Earth, probably more? Was it present? I see this as a motivating moment. It's widely viewed as a dangerous limit to warming, even though we all know what it is here, but the public understands it's a big deal. What was the discussion at the COP on this temperature spike, and what do you guys think about it being a motivational moment?
Well, neither of Viktor or I were in the formal negotiation rooms, but I think every year another year passes, and every year there's something that you say, right, this is it. Surely now the shit has hit the fan. But the fan is remarkably resilient to any form of shit that hits it. There is plenty of discussion in and amongst those of us who were talking about these things, but there was no formal point in time you say, right, hey guys, this is a big thing. With so many thousands of people at COP, there were the big protests, the big noisy protests. You probably could guess, but it was nothing to do with climate. It was to do with Palestine and Israel. They were the big noisy protests. So make of that what you will.
Thank you. Yeah. Viktor, do you comment on that? Or?
No, I'm good.
Okay, thank you. Okay, last but not least is Rebecca. I think I'm just saying last because we're just about at the 6 o'clock here. Rebecca, go ahead, please.
My question was similar, and in some ways Hugh's already answered it in his last comment, but I was wondering what interaction was there at COP between the NGOs, or the non-formal part of it, and the formal part. Did any of the representatives come out and listen to any of the forums that on SRM or engineering or intervention or repair?
Viktor, do you how many times did you see any of the sort of formal negotiation teams come to our various meetings?
My other question is, do you think influence was happening anyway? Like, is there a cross-fertilisation? That's really my question.
Well, I mean,
yeah, go, Viktor. Yeah.
Yeah, there are like policymakers present at the pavilion who aren't generally in these kind of discussions. So I do believe we managed to reach out.
You're breaking up, Viktor. Can you repeat that?
Well, we managed to reach policymakers who like, for example, the Minister of the Climate in Finland was at our presentation for a while at least, and his assistant was there for the whole time, and yeah, so some pretty influential people were reached, but if you have something to add, yeah.
No, but I think I I know that people from the formal negotiation rooms were out and about, walking around and dipping into to things, but it was very informal. But look, we were there, and I think we as I think represent trying to buoy up Operaatio Arktis and their spirit. I think that is, as I said right at the beginning, important, and that hopefully, it's a bit feeble, but I hope there was an impact. So I just want to say, as we're winding up towards the end, just thank Ron for giving us an opportunity to talk about COP. It's even just trying to talk about it, I think I find helpful to try and get my thoughts in line, and hearing your responses has been extremely useful.
Thank you, Hugh. Hugh, just before I let Viktor share his final thoughts, if you mentioned a lot of the materials and things that you found there that were put out by mostly younger people. Are those available on the internet, or could you send us links or encourage more dissemination of this? Yeah,
the one on the 61 interventions, Leslie has put a link in the chat. That was this one that I showed you.
Okay. I think Leslie was saying the New York Times had something on that, but yeah.
Yeah, they did.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, they referred to the same report. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Leslie. Yeah.
So the thing that I can't find on this thing, I can't find a link. But now technology, if somebody gets their phone out and scans that, if they hold it up for long enough, then somebody might find magically that will provide the link. If someone can do that, then I suspect.
Hey, I think I got it. Thank you, Hugh. Yeah, I'll try to.
So that'll take you to this thing, and they're the main ones that I talked about. And also I put in the chat the link to the presentation on there's no 1.5 without intervention. And I don't know whether Viktor, you've got handy a link to this report, because those who've not Viktor, you'll have a link to that report, and I think it's available. The whole thing is available as a PDF, and it's very heartening. So Viktor might put that in the chat. And that's not an outcome of COP28, but it's very much this. It states the position of Operaatio Arktis.
Right. Yeah, it's a report we wrote last year, and probably not that much new information for you, but perhaps the risk analysis would be something of interest to you. It can be found on our website, and yeah, the little like pamphlet you showed, that's from SRM Youth Watch. Clara Botta is the main person there. She's really great. But yeah, thank you for this discussion, and I'll be here in the future, or someone from my team. We're gonna try to have representation. We appreciate the discussions here and all of your knowledge. Thank you.
Thank you, Viktor, very much, and Hugh for offering to present your experience, and thank you everyone for joining us. I think it has been an interesting discussion, and we wide ranging, and I apologize if I tried to redirect things toward the COP situation, but I just was trying to get us to move along things, but Anyway, if the steering circle folks could stay for a little while longer, I think we will formally adjourn the meeting. And again, thank you all. And we just have to keep working on this. I think we actually the fact that I think your group, Viktor, and other groups of young people is really the most important thing here. And so it is really a hopeful sign that young folks are getting the message. I mean, if you could go over to perhaps to Stockholm and get hold of Greta and try and
Yeah.
this would be very, very helpful. But thank you all. And
is the chat going to be saved? Because a lot of useful links and information in the chat. I don't know whether
I was trying to do that. Robert, can you make sure that Robert will have it? He's the host, and I'm sure he'll be able to share the chat with everyone.
Yes, I'll do that. You can also say.
Thank you, Robert.
Great. Thanks very much.